Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
My name is Edward Goodliffe, and I am Speaker of Congress, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to Operation Destination. Now, I think that Murphy was an optimist, because if there's one day in the whole year that I need to be able to speak properly, it's today. And I've got a croaky voice, for which I apologize. So please bear with me if I'm having trouble getting the words out. Now, first of all, I must go through one or two things on the agenda here. When I finish speaking, we're going to get everybody to do self-introductions. Now, this means that I'm not going to introduce each person. They're going to do it themselves. We're going to pass the microphone around so that everyone can let us know, one by one, what motivated them to be associated with Freedom Force International and tell us a bit about themselves. And we will work our way around. We are allowing 3 minutes each. Now, we have so many things on today's agenda that we are going to have to be very disciplined. We cannot afford to overrun. Now, my wife, Jane, who's sitting right here at this table, is going to give me the indication if I'm talking too long, and it has been known to happen. In fact, some say that I was vaccinated with a gramophone needle, so we've got to be very careful. Now, right. A year ago, at Operation Liftoff, we had a very successful meeting. It was incredible. I've never been in the company of so many well-informed individualists in my life. And since that time, I need to report to you what has happened. Now, there are many people who think that nothing's happened because they don't see any news about what is happening with Freedom Force. Well, we have kept in constant communication with each other. This is talking about the Leadership Council. And we have been working on getting things done. And the plan of attack has been to recruit members and to get the message out. One of the key achievements that took place in the summer was the production of this manual, the Freedom Force International Members Manual. Now, Mr. Edward Griffin, he worked on this diligently, and he came up with his proposal, and he presented it to us to pull apart. And needless to say, we found things that we thought maybe weren't perfect, and it didn't take long until he polished it up to the point that we have a dynamite book. This book is absolutely first rate. Now, in here it lists all sorts of stuff that is so imperative to know as far as the rights of the individual are concerned. Now, about 3 or 4 days ago, I thought about what I was going to say this morning, and I started writing something up. Well, on the plane coming over here, I read this book. And by the time I'd finished reading this book, I realized that what I'd written was totally irrelevant, so I've thrown it out. So I'm now having to start from scratch. But the fact is that over the last year, we have been out putting into practice what we talked about a year ago. And throughout history, it hasn't been the majority that has made change. It has been a very tiny minority, a minority of people that realized that change was needed, and they effected it. Now, with Freedom Force, that is exactly the situation. From the tiny acorn, the mighty oak doth grow. And we might be closer to the acorn right now than we are to the mighty oak. But the fact is, we have the nucleus here. We know what needs to be done, and we're putting it into action. Now, I must tell you just my experience this year of what I've done. And although it hasn't been perfect and there have been setbacks, overall there have been some achievements made. Now, as you may know or may not know, I live in Alberta in Western Canada, and about 15 years ago, a few of us got together and started a new party called the Wild Rose Party because we were so disgusted with the party that was in power. They called themselves the Progressive Conservative Party, and initially they were very conservative, and towards the end they were all progressive. And so it became rather frustrating that there was nobody that you could vote for if you wanted an individualist in charge. So we formed this new party. I was one of the people there that formed this party. And as the years have gone by, we've made progress. Well, anyway, after coming to the Freedom Force meeting last year, I thought, well, I really had better get back into being involved with the Wild Rose. So I went along to the local constituency association annual general meeting. And I managed to get elected to the board of directors. So this is a genuine power centre. Now, the Wild Rose has never elected a candidate in our riding, but I thought, well, I'm going to go along and see if I can help make it happen. Well, at that meeting, we were introduced to the candidate that was going to run. Well, you imagine my horror when I heard this man talking, and he sounded collectivist through and through. I could hardly believe what I was listening to. And so at the end of that meeting, I got together with one of the other board members and said, look, we really have to change this situation. Now, I told everybody on the board about Freedom Force, and I couldn't find a single soul that didn't agree with everything we got in this book. Well, I got together with this one fellow, and we said, right, we're going to find somebody else. So we searched around and we found this fellow who is a staunch individualist, a good man, in fact, a pig farmer. And if he can survive in the pig industry, he's got to be good with money. So we thought, right, we're going to try and get him nominated. So we went out and we spoke to as many members as possible and recruited new members to get them to support our candidate, Glenn. We forced the runoff, and there was a runoff meeting, and I'm very pleased to report we beat the collectivist and we got our man in, a true individualist. Now, having done that, we now have the next stage we had to deal with. A few weeks later, a provincial general election was called, and we then had to get our man in. And bear in mind, we've never had a candidate other than a progressive conservative in that constituency for about 25 years. Well, anyway, we went out there and campaigned furiously, and we got Glenn elected. Stage 2. We now have Glenn elected, and I might add that during the election campaign, the leader of the party, who I'd never met because he was recently elected to that position, he came to our riding to make a speech. And he made his speech, and afterwards I had to go and talk to him, because although he sounded very sincere in that, it didn't have any fire in it at all. And so I went up to him and I told him that his speech was lacking. Could I write a speech for him? So I wrote a speech for him, which he later used in the riding of Medicine Hat, and it went over very well. Well, anyway, I have formed a friendship with the leader of the opposition, because the Wild Rose became the official opposition, came from nowhere to be the second biggest party in the House. Now, Brian Jean, who is the leader of the party, now knows all about Freedom Force. In fact, every MLA that I saw there, I told about Freedom Force. If you look at our mission, what we have to do is we have to get into the centres of power, and we have to influence people to look after the individualist. And that is what I've done in a very small scale in Alberta, and I feel very pleased that it worked. And if we were to do this 1,000 times over throughout the world, we could really make a difference. Now today, we're going to hear from several speakers here, and I must admit, I was delighted when I saw that Dan Happel is here. Where are you, Dan? Oh, there's Dan. Now, Dan, I came across Dan's presentation at Kalispell, all about Agenda 21, and I have been trying to wake people up to what's going on because it is such a serious issue. And we in Alberta have all the major cities belong to ICLEI, the United Nations body that is pushing Agenda 21, and most of the municipal councils are getting on board as well. And they are pushing this very sinister agenda. And when I saw Dan's presentation down in Kalispell, I thought, wow, that's our man. Because Dan doesn't pull any punches at all. He knows what he's talking about. And what he's talking about is so horrific that you would think it would have to be fiction. But we will hear from Dan later, and I'm looking forward to that. There are many issues, and I see from Jane that I'm running out of time. So I am going to stop talking, and we're going to get on to the rest of the agenda.